now we're gonna move on to Patrick Lowe, the Executive Director for UGC. Beef Breeds Council, help us with this. We had a big project at Haven University this last September, upon request of UGC to put together a low model cattle, high model cattle. And Patrick's gonna share a part of that data with us and, have lots of questions after the end. Hopefully we can answer all the questions about why ultrasound doesn't get marketing right. Well, he's gonna answer that.
All right. I need this probably, no? Hear me okay? Yeah, okay, cool. We're gonna talk about the ends of the bell curve, and I'll describe to you kind of what we did with the project. I'm not gonna share a ton of specific results, and I'll explain why here in a minute, but when I talk about the bell curve, I mean the natural bell curve of distribution of marbling. Some of the the original IMF models used a data set that looked kind of like this red curve. Lots of high select, low choice feedlot steers. Not a ton of variation. IMF probably went from 2 to 8, maybe a little more. When we certified newer technology, we did a little better. We got some primes, spread the data a little more, and the models got better at predicting those cattle. In a perfect world, our data set for IMF to develop a great IMF model should look like this. The same number of low, high, middle. You have to train the model to find all those. Well, the question at the top, are we asking too much from an ultrasound machine? Is it even possible to accurately predict 20% IMF and 1% IMF on the same algorithm? We don't really know that. So the research project was kind of the first step. We're not done. We'll keep doing this. Haven't planned anything yet, but we'll keep working on the ends of the spectrum because these are the cattle we're most interested in. We want to get rid of the low end and propagate the high end. And what some breeds are asking for is very different from ultrasound. You know, the Brahman Association asks a very different question than Wagyu. The cattle grade differently. They feed differently. They're different ages. So can we do an IMF model that accurately predicts both kinds of cattle? So the research trial, we set it up at West Texas A&M. It was actually in conjunction with the field certification. So we had a lot of people, a lot of shoots, and here's kind of the goals. We weren't setting out to see exactly how we were doing on the ends of the spectrum. That was part of it, but we wanted to assess it, but then give the labs this data to improve the current IMF models they already have. And maybe they were good enough on those cattle, maybe they weren't, but we didn't know. And we have several machines that are out in the industry that haven't been around very long. They're still less than what, 5, 6, 7 years old. So we don't have a ton of carcass data behind them. The population has certainly moved from where we started 25 years ago. So we need to keep moving with it. The questions we kind of asked, do we need specific breed or type IMF models? We know the height and thickness between breeds is different. We know the density of some of the hides is different. Should we be developing an IMF model specific to a certain type of cattle? Should eared breeds have their own models? We don't know the answer to that question, but we can certainly test. USDA Prime, how good are we doing? We are certainly producing more of those on the rail than we were. What does our current IMF model look like on prime cattle? And then kind of what we ended up finding out is what are our limitations? We can't expect an ultrasound machine to do it all. It's a two-dimensional black and white image. It does have limitations. The labs were given the IMF data. I just want to point out that Cavernous beef in Hereford, Texas got the really high-end stuff. The low IMF or the rest of them, I'll say, went to Amarillo, to Tyson. So we were dealing with a little compounding variable there, that they all didn't die at the same plant, they all didn't get graded by the same grader, so there's a little bit of a difference there. I don't know from one plant to the other if the chill time and the bloom time is exactly the same. We don't know that. It was talked about how expensive collecting this data is. For the first 20 years of UGC, the labs were sort of expected to do this on their own. If you wanted to improve an IMF model or certify an IMF model, you had to pay for all of the data that it took to get that done. I didn't really like that. It was counterintuitive. The technology didn't advance very quickly because it was too darn expensive. So UGC accumulated some funds over time. We took $24,000 to get this data. So the high marbling group, Dr. Lawrence, who has been mentioned, went out and found these cattle at feed yards near the Panhandle of Texas. We had 33 head in that group. There were some Akaushi Wagyu. Some of them were just regular black and red hided feedlot steers. Here's how they graded. There was one local choice, four average, or one average choice, four high, 18 low primes, 7 average, and 2 high primes. And the cool thing about this, the highest IMF was one of the high primes. So we got the ends of the spectrum pretty well covered. 82% primes, a pretty darn good load cattle. IMF ranged from 5.4 to 24. Yes, the low choice was the 5.4. So it was a good group. The average was 10.6. The low marbling group, they were a little more of a struggle. There was 31 of them. 2 of them had to be euthanized, and 1 missed carcass data. I don't know why, but there was no data on one of them. Those cattle were a little more aggressive. And if you can see that picture, if I could point to it, there are 16, I think it was, chutes, 20 chutes that animal had to move through 20 times. Some of them didn't handle it very well. And it's hard on their feet, it's hard on their legs. They're just not used to being worked with that way. And the low marbling group suffered a bit more. Here's how they graded: 3 standards, 12 selects, 9 low choice, 4 average. So actually some of the cattle were a little better than we hoped. But IMF ranged from 0.8%, 0.8%, up to about 6 with an average of 3. Those of you that are wondering what an average of 3 means, that's select. Okay, so we did what we wanted, finding the cattle we were after. The field certification was happening at the same time. That's why there's 20 chutes in a row. We could do 20 technicians all in one day. There were 77 head of those, and some variation. We wanted a little bit more, but that's how that group graded. So I hate to put ultrasound images on a screen in this environment because that's not how we look at them. We turn the lights off. And so they're a little harder to see, but this is from the Evo machine, one of the newer machines. And this is the lowest IMF animal in the group. This is 0.8%. So as you can see, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where the ribeye muscle is in that picture. Okay, he's pretty lean. Anybody can draw that. The IMF image, very easy to take. There is an advantage to leaner, low marbling cattle when it comes to scanning. They're just flat easier to do. There's the 24. So yes, that's a ribeye image on the lower left. And measuring his ribeye is what we call a scientific wild ass guess. Because you can't see the bottom. There's not enough power left in the ultrasound machine to tell us where the bottom boundary is. So one of the limitations we have with ultrasound, he's too fat. He's probably 8/10. The ultrasound waves have to go through all that fat as well. And there's just not enough left because there's so much scatter and bounce off of the marbling that's in that picture. We can't see the ribeye. So if we're going to continue to predict accurately on cattle, let's say over 15% IMF, we're probably going to have to be okay with not getting a measure of muscle. because ribeye just flat will be impossible on a lot of them. So that's part of our limitation. So this is the same two individuals. This is from the Exego machine. I believe there's more Exego machines out there in the country than any of the other ones currently. The Evo and the Exego would be 1 and 2. Same type of thing. The 24% IMF, you can't even see the ribs. So, those kinds of cattle are absolutely challenging to get good images on. And thankfully, we didn't have that animal in the certification set, or a really green new technician would have wondered what the hell happened to his machine when that animal came in, because you're just not used to seeing something like that. So these two animals also graded prime. This is a different set of cattle, not from the research project, but I just wanted to show you how difficult it can be to get a ribeye and fat measurement when they're that high marbling. These cattle are leaner than the previous one that I showed you in the study, which makes it a little more feasible to get that number. When they get really, really fat, it doesn't matter how much marbling they have. We can't see the bottom of the ribeye in a lot of those cattle either. So I mentioned the limitations, and this is kind of the grading system. And most of what we've got for research, carcass data, all the above, fits within this window. Very few low select, very few average to high prime. What the research study allowed us to do is expand what we at least can predict, okay? We didn't get very many up in this region here, but we got some. What I think we'll probably need to do moving forward is kind of just say ultrasound can't live within this box. We've got to do something to keep them within the USDA grading system, I'll say. There's just way too much marbling in those pictures to expect a muscle, for sure a ribeye measurement. And you know, it was mentioned earlier in the talks, do we care what the difference is between 30 and 40% IMF? Well, somebody does. And they probably don't care about muscle on that particular animal. So if they want an IMF model for something that high, we're gonna have to find all those cattle, collect them, kill them, and do all of that. And those cattle are challenging to find, let alone let somebody that has an entire load of them, let us in a plant, get the data out, and pulling a rib sliver on something with 45% IMF, they're probably not gonna sell that to us for $1.99 a pound. So it will be expensive, even more expensive than what we're currently doing. So what did we learn? The current IMF models that we have do need to improve on the ends. We can do better at extremely high and extremely low IMF cattle. The labs do have this data to get that process started. They will be submitting new IMF models that try to do a better job of describing those cattle. This is probably the most important part. This has and will piss off a lot of breeders. When this, particularly on the low end cattle, anytime you drop an average, that doesn't mean their bulls are worse. That means the IMF model that's predicting what their IMF is more accurate than the old one. That's going to be very hard to explain to some breeders that are a little unhappy, but that's what's going on. Ultrasound should not try to accurately predict above the USDA grading system for marbling. If we do, there will be no ribeye area. I'm pretty confident in that statement. If we're going to chase IMF models outside of that low prime, high prime area, we're not going to probably expect a muscle measurement. High marbling breeds may need to consider opening younger age windows. They still need to avoid the maternal effect. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second, but I think there's some things we can do there. Collecting IMF data is really expensive. We've mentioned that in talks previous. UGC is going to continue to support the labs and try to help them continue to get better. The breed associations are taking a more active role. The research foundations within those specific breeds may play a role in helping fund some of this research. So I always like to leave these BIF meetings with something to think about, ponder. Normally when we're sitting talking with a drink, we learn a heck of a lot more than we ever do looking at my slides. But here's what I want to send everyone home with. We're not scanning enough heifers. We never have. It's hovered around that 30 to 35% number since ultrasound was used. 95% of your bull data walks off the farm within 60 days of when you collect it. A lot of your heifer data stays for a long time. If we're not scanning females, and carcass-wise, she's not what you're looking for, she's 3.5 years old and bred back before you can ever realize you made a mistake. How many of you sell your bred 3-year-olds? No one. So she stays. Is some of our lack of progress due to the fact that we're not scanning females? This is my statement, this is my quote. Carcass cattle have a look. Anybody ever said that to themselves? It's not a maternal look. We know they're bigger. Some of them are kind of hard looking, right? They don't look maternal. So are we culling replacement heifers for phenotype at the expense of carcass progress? It's a question I don't know the answer to, but it's possible. If we're just using the big bellied soft ones that look cool in our replacement pen, maybe those aren't the ones carcass wise that we should be chasing. Can we scan heifers post weaning? I know a lot of producers are busy. We get the bull scan, we get the bull sale done, and you turn around and it's time to get them bred. So a lot of them say it's just a time issue. I don't have time. Can we do them before you do the bulls? Do them younger. Why do we care about the maternal effect? We always talk about it, right? If you have a heifer that's high marbling and chubby off the cow, do we care? No, you probably are going to keep her anyway. Does it harm a genetic evaluation? Yeah, they probably don't want to see that kind of information, but if we believe our own research, creep feeding heifers is bad. I don't think we can scan heavy creep fed heifers right after weaning. We have done several behavior studies at Iowa State. Some calves camp out in the creep feeder all summer. Some of them never visit. That's not good data. So if you're not creep feeding, I think we could scan heifers younger than we do right now. It was mentioned before, the question was asked over here. There is no testosterone effect in females. It's better data, especially if you do it younger because they're not cycling yet. So I hope that breed associations, breeders consider incentives for scanning more females. There has been a lot of money thrown at trying to get more carcass data. That's great. I wish there was equal support to get more females scanned. It should be a lot closer to 50-50 than 65-35. And with that, there's my contact info. I'll take any questions you have.